I remember the first time I saw her. Not because she walked into the room like she owned it, not because everyone turned their heads to look at her, but because when her eyes met mine, something inside me shifted. It was like the air thickened, like my chest forgot how to breathe for a second. I didn't even know her name yet, but my heart already recognized her. It scared me. Because the kind of pull I felt wasn't the one people talk about in stories, not the safe kind that parents smile at when you bring someone home. It was the kind of pull that made me want to run and stay at the same time. The kind that felt dangerous but alive. I told myself it was nothing. Just nerves. Just curiosity. But the truth? Deep down, I knew it was something more. Something I had been pushing away for years, and yet, that night, when I went home, I couldn't stop replaying the moment, her smile, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the confidence in the way she carried herself. It haunted me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel broken for noticing, because maybe this was the beginning of something I had been searching for all along. I always thought I knew myself. I thought I had figured out the rules of living: smile when people expect you to smile, laugh at the right jokes, pretend to be interested in the boys who asked for my number even when I felt nothing. I carried that act everywhere, like a heavy coat that never fit but I couldn't take off. Inside, though, it was different. Inside, I was quiet, restless, and secretly ashamed of the thoughts that drifted through my mind at night. I told myself to bury them. I told myself they weren't real. But the more I tried to silence that part of me, the louder it screamed. And then she walked into my life, and suddenly nothing I had been telling myself made sense anymore. The first time I saw her, it was like the world shifted a little to the left. She wasn't like anyone I had known before. She moved with this careless confidence, as if she didn't owe the world an explanation. Her laugh echoed in the room, bold and unafraid, and when her eyes met mine, it felt like they reached into me and pulled something out I had buried for years. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Something in her gaze made me feel seen, truly seen, in a way I never thought possible. It terrified me, but it also left me wanting more. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the way her lips curved when she smiled, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear like she didn't care that the whole room was watching her. I hated myself for noticing. I hated myself for the warmth that spread through me when I thought about her. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop. Every detail of her stayed with me, the sound of her voice, the way she looked comfortable in her own skin. It was different from me, so different. I had spent years hiding pieces of myself, while she carried hers like armor. And I couldn't stop wondering what it would feel like to be that free. The next day, I tried to convince myself it had been nothing. Just a silly crush, maybe admiration. That's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew it wasn't the truth. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't a crush that would disappear in a week. It was something deeper, something that scared me because it wasn't supposed to happen, at least not to me. But the fear didn't erase it. If anything, it made it stronger. I caught myself searching for her face in the crowd, listening for her laugh across the room. And when she spoke to me for the first time, my whole body betrayed me. My hands shook, my voice caught in my throat, and all I could think was how close she was, how her eyes seemed to read everything I was trying to hide. She asked me something simple, something meaningless, about a book in my hand, about where the library was, I don't even remember exactly. What I do remember is the way her voice wrapped around me, soft but steady, like she wasn't afraid of being heard. I answered too quickly, too nervously, and I could feel my face burning. She just smiled, not mocking, not judging, just smiling. And in that moment, something inside me cracked open. It was like I had been holding my breath for years without realizing it, and she was the first person who made me inhale properly. I didn't tell anyone about how I felt. How could I? People already had expectations for me, what I should like, who I should love, how I should live. I didn't want to be the disappointment, the one who strayed too far from what was normal. But every time I saw her, every time she spoke to me, it got harder to pretend. The lies I had been telling myself started to feel weaker, more fragile. And I hated that part of me still clung to fear, that I couldn't just be honest about the way she made me feel. At night, when the house was silent and the world was asleep, I would let myself imagine. I would close my eyes and replay the sound of her laugh, the way her hand brushed against mine accidentally in the hallway, the way her eyes softened when she talked to me. And even though guilt crept in afterward, even though I told myself it was wrong, for those moments I felt alive. I felt like I was touching something real, something I had been starving for without knowing it. I don't know if she noticed the way I looked at her. I don't know if she could hear the tremble in my voice every time I spoke. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was pulling me into a world I had been too afraid to explore. A world that might break me apart or set me free. And even though fear screamed inside me, I couldn't stop myself from wanting more of her. I couldn't stop myself from wanting to know what it meant to feel this way, what it meant to want someone so deeply, so honestly, without apology. That was how it began, quietly, unexpectedly, with a single glance that turned my entire world upside down. I didn't know what would come next, I didn't know how dangerous it could be, but I knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. Days passed, but her presence didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger inside me, like an echo that refused to die down. Every morning, I woke up with her face somewhere in the back of my mind, and every night, she found her way into my thoughts before I closed my eyes. I started to notice things I hadn't before: how her laugh didn't just fill a room but lingered, how her eyes had this strange softness in them when she listened to someone, how she always seemed so sure of herself even when she wasn't trying. It made me wonder how a person could exist with so much ease when I felt like I was drowning just trying to be myself. I wanted to understand her. I wanted to know what it felt like to live without fear. We began to talk more, slowly at first, in the small spaces life offered us, between classes, walking down the hall, waiting for the bus. She always started the conversation, and I always stumbled my way through responses, but little by little, it got easier. There was a strange comfort in talking to her, like the world outside faded whenever her attention was on me. We started sharing things that didn't matter at first: favorite songs, the kind of food we liked, silly stories that had no purpose except to make each other laugh. But even in those small exchanges, I felt the walls around me start to thin. Then came the longer talks, the ones that stretched into the evening. I remember one night sitting with her in the library, books spread around us but forgotten, as we drifted into conversations about who we really were beneath everything. She spoke about herself openly in a way that left me both in awe and terrified. She didn't hesitate when she told me she liked girls. She said it the same way someone might say they liked coffee or preferred rainy days, casual and unashamed. My chest tightened hearing it, not because I judged her, but because I envied her courage. She didn't whisper it. She didn't look over her shoulder to make sure no one else was listening. She just said it, like it was a truth she had accepted long ago. I wanted to respond, to tell her that I understood, that I felt the same way. but the words got trapped in my throat. Fear pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. Instead, I just nodded, smiled too quickly, and hoped she couldn't see how badly my hands were shaking under the table. She didn't push. She never pushed. She just looked at me with this quiet understanding, as if she already knew what I was too afraid to admit. That was what unsettled me the most, how she could read me so easily, how she saw through the mask I had been wearing all my life. After that night, something changed between us. Our conversations carried more weight. There was a closeness in the way she leaned toward me, in the pauses between our sentences, in the way her eyes lingered just a little longer than before. I found myself drawn to her in ways I couldn't explain. It wasn't just attraction, it was safety. With her, I felt like I didn't have to pretend, even though I was still too afraid to be honest. She had this way of making the world feel softer, less cruel, even when everything inside me was chaos. I started to crave that feeling. I started looking for excuses to see her more. Study sessions turned into late-night talks over the phone. Walks home stretched into hours as we lingered on street corners, not wanting the day to end. Each moment with her was like a thread pulling me out of the darkness I had been living in for so long. But with every pull toward her, there was also fear, the fear of being caught, the fear of being judged, the fear of what it would mean if I finally admitted what my heart already knew. One evening, we sat together on a park bench, the air cool and heavy with the scent of rain. She told me about her childhood, about how she had always known who she was even when others didn't approve. There was pain in her voice, but also strength. She talked about losing friends, about the silence of family members who couldn't look her in the eye, about nights she cried herself to sleep but woke up the next morning still determined to be herself. Listening to her, my chest ached. I wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her she wasn't alone anymore, that I was there. But my fear betrayed me again, and I just sat there, staring at the ground, too scared to give myself away. Yet even in my silence, she didn't pull away. She simply leaned back, looked up at the sky, and whispered that she believed everyone deserved love, no matter what. Her words sank deep into me, wrapping around the parts of me I had spent years hiding. And in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't just someone I was drawn to. She was someone who was teaching me how to breathe, how to live, how to stop running from myself. That night, as I lay in bed, I let myself imagine a world where I could hold her hand in public without fear, where I could smile at her without guilt, where I could say out loud what I had been too afraid to whisper even in my own mind. I wasn't there yet. I didn't know if I ever would be. But for the first time, I allowed myself to want it. For the first time, I believed maybe it was possible. It happened on a quiet evening when everything felt ordinary but somehow became unforgettable. We were sitting together in her room, textbooks open in front of us, though neither of us was paying attention to the words on the pages. We had been laughing about something silly, our shoulders brushing as we leaned closer to share notes, our voices soft in the stillness of the room. The laughter faded, but neither of us pulled away. Instead, silence settled between us, thick and heavy, filled with something unspoken. My heart began to race, and I knew this wasn't just about studying anymore. I could feel the warmth of her arm against mine, the subtle brush of her hand when she shifted the book closer, and every tiny movement sent a ripple through me. I wanted to say something, anything, but my tongue felt tied. My eyes betrayed me, though, because they kept drifting toward her lips, toward the curve of her smile that seemed to know a secret I didn't. And then, for the first time, I realized she was watching me too, her gaze lingering in the same way mine did. The air between us grew heavy, alive, as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for what might happen next. I tried to look away, tried to remind myself of everything I had been taught to fear, but the pull was too strong. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened, and before I could stop myself, I met her eyes again. They were softer than usual, almost questioning, like she was giving me a choice, to run or to stay. My hands trembled in my lap, my breath caught in my throat, but I didn't move. I stayed. That was all she needed. Slowly, gently, she leaned closer. I could feel the warmth of her breath on my skin, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the air, and my whole body burned with nerves. My mind screamed at me to back away, to stop, to remember the rules of the world I lived in. But my heart was louder this time. My heart begged me not to let the moment pass. And then, before I even realized what was happening, her lips brushed against mine. It was soft, tentative, almost unsure, but it shattered something inside me. For years, I had been pretending, suppressing, burying feelings I didn't want to admit. But in that single kiss, all of those lies fell apart. It wasn't fireworks or lightning, it was something deeper, something truer. It was the kind of kiss that didn't need to be explained, the kind that said, I see you. I know you. And I want you as you are. My eyes fluttered shut, and I let myself sink into the moment, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break free from my chest. When we finally pulled away, I felt dizzy, breathless, unsure if I should laugh or cry. I searched her face for answers, for some sign that I wasn't alone in this, and what I found was a quiet smile, tender and reassuring. She didn't rush to speak, didn't make it awkward. She just looked at me with a calmness that steadied the storm inside me. I wanted to tell her everything in that moment, how long I had felt this way, how scared I was, how much she meant to me, but the words refused to come. All I managed was a shaky smile, and somehow, she understood. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. Every glance, every small touch said more than words ever could. My heart was still racing, my body buzzing with both fear and excitement, but for the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in carrying this secret. For the first time, I felt like someone had reached into the hidden parts of me and chosen to stay. That night, lying in bed, I pressed my fingers to my lips and replayed the moment over and over. It felt surreal, like a dream I had been waiting for without knowing it. But it was real. She was real. And that kiss was proof that I wasn't broken, that what I felt wasn't a mistake. It was love in its purest form, fragile, new, but undeniable. I knew the world outside would never make it easy. I knew there would be whispers, judgment, maybe even rejection. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the way she made me feel, the way one kiss had opened a door I could never close again. The days after that kiss felt different, like the world had changed its shape and I was still learning how to walk in it. Every time I saw her, my stomach twisted with nerves but also with this electric joy I couldn't put into words. It was as if something inside me had been unlocked, and now I couldn't go back to who I was before. We didn't talk about what happened at first. We carried on like nothing had changed, but everything had. Our hands would linger just a little too long when we passed each other something, our eyes would meet and hold for a moment longer than they should, and in those silences, all the unspoken truths burned brighter than any words could. It was beautiful, but it was also terrifying, because the world around us wasn't blind. I started to notice the whispers. The sideways glances from people who saw us sitting too close together, the smirks from boys who thought they knew something they shouldn't, the sudden hush that fell when we walked into a room. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that people weren't really paying attention, but the longer it went on, the clearer it became. People were watching. People were talking. And every look, every rumor, felt like a weight pressing down on me, threatening to crush this fragile thing we had just begun. At home, I became quieter, more careful, as though the walls themselves were listening. My family didn't suspect anything yet, but I lived with the constant fear that one slip of the tongue, one glance too warm, one smile too wide would give me away. My parents asked harmless questions, about school, about friends, and I lied with practiced ease, hiding the truth behind casual words. Each lie dug deeper into me, leaving me hollow, but I didn't know how to tell them the truth. I didn't know how to say that the girl they thought was just my friend had become the only person who made me feel whole. She, on the other hand, seemed less afraid. Maybe she had already lived through the pain of being found out, maybe she was just braver than me, but she held herself with a confidence I envied. She didn't shrink under the whispers. She didn't hide her smile when she looked at me. Instead, she would squeeze my hand under the table when no one was looking, or lean just a little closer than necessary when we talked. She gave me strength in those small gestures, as if to say, we are not wrong. We are not ashamed. But even with her courage, I felt the fear pressing harder every day. One afternoon, as we sat together under the shade of an old tree near the park, I finally let my worries spill out. My voice trembled as I confessed how scared I was, scared of my parents finding out, scared of losing friends, scared of being judged, scared of the world labeling me as something I wasn't ready to face. She listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving mine, her fingers brushing gently against mine like she was reminding me she was still there. When I finished, tears stung my eyes because saying the fears out loud made them feel heavier, more real. But she just reached over, took my hand, and said softly, "We don't need their approval to exist. You and me, that's enough." Her words sank into me, but they didn't erase the fear completely. That night, I lay awake thinking about all the ways this could end badly. People at school had already started pulling away. Some friends who once sat with us avoided my table now. There were comments whispered just loud enough for me to hear, cruel jokes dressed up as humor, and moments when I caught someone staring at me like I was something strange. Each time, it chipped away at me, and I wondered how much more I could take before I broke. But then there were the moments with her. Moments when her laughter cut through all the noise, when her touch steadied me, when her presence made everything else fade. I would replay those moments when the world felt unbearable, clinging to them like a lifeline. She was becoming my safe place, my anchor in a storm I didn't know how to survive. Yet a part of me couldn't stop wondering, how long could we keep this balance? How long before the world outside forced its way between us and demanded answers we weren't ready to give? That question haunted me every day. And though I tried to silence it, deep down I knew the world wasn't going to let us stay invisible forever. Someone would push harder, someone would ask questions we couldn't avoid, and when that happened, I wasn't sure if I'd be strong enough to hold on. But for now, I clung to her hand, her smile, her unwavering belief that what we had was real. For now, I let myself believe that love, even in its most fragile form, was worth the risk. It happened sooner than I thought it would. Secrets have a way of slipping into the light no matter how tightly you try to hold them in the dark, and mine broke open one evening when I least expected it. I had been careless, maybe too comfortable in believing that as long as I smiled and played the role everyone wanted, I would be safe. But truth doesn't stay hidden forever. That night, while I was in my room, my phone lit up with her name, and in a rush of excitement I answered without checking the door. My voice softened the way it only did with her, full of warmth I couldn't hide. I didn't notice my mother lingering in the hallway, didn't realize she had heard enough to piece things together. By the time I hung up, the look on her face told me everything. She knew her silence was worse than shouting. For a moment, I thought she might let it go, but then came the questions, sharp and heavy, each one cutting deeper than the last. Who was that? Why do you sound different with her? Is there something you're not telling me? I tried to deny it, tried to hide behind half-truths and nervous laughter, but my trembling hands betrayed me. She pressed harder, her voice growing colder with each word, until finally, cornered and exhausted, I whispered the truth I had been burying for so long. I like her. I think I love her. The silence that followed felt endless. My mother's face tightened, her eyes hard with disbelief, then disappointment. She spoke words I had dreaded hearing my whole life, words about shame, about sin, about how she hadn't raised me to be like this. Each sentence landed like a stone in my chest, crushing the fragile courage it had taken to speak at all. I tried to explain, tried to tell her this wasn't something I had chosen, that this was simply who I was, but she turned away as if even looking at me hurt. The rejection in her eyes burned more than any insult could. I couldn't stay in that room, couldn't breathe under the weight of her silence and judgment. I grabbed my jacket and ran, the night air biting against my skin as I stumbled through the streets. I didn't know where I was going until I ended up at her door, tears streaking my face, chest heaving with sobs I couldn't control. She opened the door and didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. She just pulled me into her arms and held me as I broke apart. Her embrace was steady, her voice soft against my ear, whispering that I wasn't wrong, that I wasn't broken, that I was loved. In her arms, I let the pain pour out. I told her everything, how my mother looked at me like I was a stranger, how the words cut so deep I wasn't sure I could heal, how afraid I was of losing everything and everyone I had known. She listened, her hand running gently through my hair, and when I finished, she lifted my chin and looked at me with a strength I didn't know I needed. "They don't get to define you," she said firmly. "They don't get to decide who you are or who you love. That belongs to you." Her words didn't erase the hurt, but they planted something stronger inside me. For so long, I had carried the belief that I was wrong, that I was unworthy. But in that moment, looking into her eyes, I began to see myself differently. Maybe I wasn't broken. Maybe love, real love, was never something to be ashamed of. It was terrifying to believe that, to push against everything I had been taught, but with her beside me, the fear seemed bearable. We sat together for hours, the night stretching into dawn. Every time doubt rose in me, she pushed it back with patience, reminding me that one person's rejection didn't erase my worth. She told me stories of her own struggles, of the nights she cried herself to sleep after someone she loved turned away, of the strength it took to keep choosing herself even when it hurt. And as I listened, I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. My pain wasn't unique, and that gave me hope. If she had survived it, maybe I could too. When I finally went home, the house felt colder, quieter, like a place I no longer belonged. My mother barely looked at me, and the silence stretched like an unspoken wall between us. But something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't just scared, I was angry. Angry that my love was seen as less, angry that I was treated like I was broken for wanting something pure and true. And in that anger, I found a strange kind of strength. I promised myself I wouldn't let their rejection erase what I had found. I promised I wouldn't let fear bury me again. That kiss, that love, her arms around me when I felt like falling apart, those were real. And no matter what anyone else said, I knew I couldn't let go of that truth. It was the only thing keeping me whole. The days after everything came crashing down were some of the hardest I had ever lived through. At home, silence became the language spoken most often. My mother avoided me, her eyes cold whenever they landed on me, her voice clipped and distant when she had no choice but to speak. My father, who had always been quieter, seemed to bury himself in work even more, as though disappearing into long hours was easier than facing me. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a cage where every corner reminded me of the distance that had grown between us. It was painful to sit at the dinner table, knowing they looked at me differently, knowing I had become a disappointment in their eyes. And yet, as much as it tore me apart, I couldn't bring myself to regret telling the truth. For the first time in my life, I had stopped lying to myself, and even though it hurt, there was a strange freedom in that, but freedom came with a price. Some friends at school who had once been close started to keep their distance, their laughter dying when I approached, their whispers sharp enough to cut. I could feel their judgment pressing on me like invisible hands, trying to shove me back into the shadows I had fought so hard to escape. Every stare, every rumor, every cruel laugh echoed the same message, that I was different, that I didn't belong. And on the worst days, I almost believed them. I almost let myself crumble under the weight of their rejection. What kept me standing was her. She refused to let me sink into the darkness. She walked beside me in hallways when others turned away. She sat with me at lunch even when the table emptied around us. She held my hand in quiet places, her thumb brushing against my skin in gentle reminders that I wasn't alone. At night, when the silence at home was unbearable, she would call me, her voice steady and soft, guiding me through the storm. She never pretended it was easy. She never promised the world would change overnight. But she reminded me, over and over, that love wasn't something to apologize for. That message became the rope I held onto when everything else felt like it was slipping away. Little by little, I began to feel the shift inside me. The shame that had weighed me down for so long started to loosen its grip. I started to walk a little taller, even when people stared. I started to smile more freely when I was with her, even if the world around us disapproved. The courage I borrowed from her slowly became my own. I realized that living in fear was its own kind of death, and I wasn't willing to bury myself again. If the world wanted to look at me like I was wrong, so be it. At least I was living honestly, at least I was loving honestly. Still, there were days that tested me. Days when the loneliness cut deep, when my family's silence felt unbearable, when I longed for the comfort of being accepted by the people who had raised me. But on those days, she reminded me that family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes, family is the one who stands beside you when the rest of the world turns away. And she was that for me, my family, my home, my safe place. Together, we began to carve out our own little space in the world. It wasn't grand or dramatic, it was in the quiet moments we chose to share. Walking hand in hand down a street, daring to let the sunlight see us. Sitting close in a cafe, not caring about the eyes that lingered too long. Laughing together in the middle of an empty park, her head resting on my shoulder as if that alone made the world less cruel. Those small rebellions felt like victories. Every time I chose not to hide, every time I chose to love her openly, I was rewriting the story I had been forced to live, and as I grew stronger, I began to notice how much she had been carrying too. She had her own scars, her own memories of rejection and hurt. There were nights when she let her walls down and I saw the pain she tried to hide. It wasn't just me who needed saving, we were saving each other, piece by piece, teaching each other how to heal. Loving her wasn't just about finding joy, it was about finding strength, about learning how to face the world even when it turned its back on us. One evening, as we sat together watching the sun sink into the horizon, she turned to me and said, "Do you see it? The way the light refuses to give up, even when the night is coming?" I nodded, not fully understanding, but she smiled and added, "That's what we are. Even when the world tries to put us out, we'll keep burning." Her words sank deep into me, carving out a truth I hadn't known how to name. We were the light. Our love, fragile and tender as it was, had a fire the world couldn't take away. That night, lying in bed, I realized something powerful. Yes, I had lost parts of my old life. Yes, my family's love had grown complicated and strained. Yes, I had friends who had turned their backs. But in the ashes of all that loss, I had found something far greater. I had found myself. And I had found her. Together, we were building a new kind of life, one that wasn't defined by shame or fear, but by truth, courage, and love. Time moved forward, and with it our love grew, though it wasn't always easy. At first, I thought the hardest part was telling the truth, facing the rejection, and surviving the silence of those who turned away. But I soon learned that love itself carried its own battles, quiet ones that lived between two people who were still figuring themselves out. We argued sometimes, not because we didn't care, but because we cared too much. There were days when I was weighed down by fear, snapping at her when she tried to pull me out of it. There were nights when she grew distant, lost in memories of her own pain, and I struggled to reach her. Love wasn't just kisses and comfort, it was raw, demanding, and it required us to be braver than either of us had ever been before. I remember one night clearly, the first real fight we ever had. It started over something small, something meaningless, a forgotten call, a missed message. But underneath it were all the unspoken insecurities we carried. I accused her of not caring enough, of being too careless with the fragile thing we had. She accused me of not trusting her, of letting my fear control everything. The words flew fast, sharp and messy, until we both fell into silence, breathing hard, staring at each other like strangers. For a moment, I thought it was the end, that one argument would shatter what we had fought so hard to protect, but then she broke the silence, her voice trembling as she said, "I'm not going anywhere." Even when you push, even when it gets hard, I'm staying. Her eyes glistened with tears, and suddenly all my anger dissolved into something else, fear of losing her, fear of being unlovable. I realized then that love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about never hurting each other. It was about choosing, again and again, to stay. I walked across the room, my hands shaking as I touched her face, and whispered that I was sorry, that I was just so scared of losing her. She held me then, tighter than before, and promised I never had to face anything alone. That moment taught me something important. Love wasn't a fairy tale, it was work. It was forgiveness and patience, it was learning to understand each other's scars and not run away from them. And slowly, through every fight and every tear, we learned how to love better. We learned to listen, to soften, to remind each other that the world outside could try to break us, but we would not break ourselves. As the months passed, I began to see how much stronger we had become. We created our own rituals, small anchors that kept us steady. Long walks on weekends where we let the world blur into the background. Quiet mornings where we drank coffee side by side, our silence comfortable and warm. Nights when we lay under the stars, our hands entwined, speaking dreams into the dark. These weren't grand gestures, but they were everything. They were proof that even in a world that often felt cold, we had built a space where love could breathe. I also began to see her in new ways. Not just as the girl who had stolen my heart, but as the woman who was teaching me how to be strong. She carried her pain with grace, but she didn't let it define her. She believed in herself, in us, even when I doubted. She became the mirror that showed me who I truly was, braver than I thought, worthy of love even when I didn't feel it. And I realized that she wasn't just the person I loved. She was the reason I was learning to love myself. One evening, as we sat together watching the city lights from a hilltop, she turned to me and said, "Do you know why I believe in us?" I shook my head, curious, and she smiled softly before answering, "Because even in our worst moments, we still find our way back to each other." That means something. That means we're stronger than what tries to tear us apart. Her words sank into me, settling deep in my chest like a truth I had been waiting to hear. For so long, I had believed love was fragile, that it could be destroyed by a single mistake. But she showed me that real love was resilient, that it could bend and strain without breaking. That night, as I lay with my head on her shoulder, I realized how far I had come. From the girl who was too afraid to even whisper the truth, to the woman who now sat openly in the arms of the one she loved, I had grown. I had changed. And though the world outside was still full of judgment, I no longer felt as fragile as I once did. Because I had something unshakable beside me. I had her. And together, we were learning that love wasn't just about finding someone who made your heart race, it was about building something that could survive anything. Time has a strange way of softening sharp edges. When I look back now, it feels almost impossible to believe how heavy the shadows once were. The fear, the silence, the constant weight of hiding, it all feels like a distant memory compared to the life we started to create. But I don't forget. I carry those pieces with me because they remind me of what it took to get here. They remind me of the nights I thought I would break, the days when the world's rejection felt unbearable, and the way love still managed to bloom in the cracks of all that pain. That love, fragile and powerful at the same time, became the foundation for everything that followed. We didn't suddenly wake up one day and find the world kinder. The stares still lingered, the whispers still traveled, and some doors never reopened. My parents remained distant, their love held hostage by their expectations of who I should be. It hurt in ways I can't fully describe, knowing that the people who once celebrated my smallest milestones couldn't celebrate the biggest truth about me. But I learned to stop begging for acceptance from those unwilling to give it. Instead, I poured my energy into the places where love grew freely. She became my safe place, yes, but so did the new family we found along the way, friends who held us close, strangers who became allies, small communities where being ourselves wasn't something to fear but something to celebrate. I remember one evening when we attended a small gathering filled with people like us. For the first time, I walked into a room and didn't feel like I had to shrink or disguise who I was. Laughter filled the air, hands held openly, kisses stolen without shame. I looked around and saw pieces of myself in everyone there, and the weight I had carried for years lifted in a way I hadn't thought possible. She squeezed my hand, her eyes gleaming with quiet joy, and whispered, "See? We're not alone." Those words settled into my bones like a promise. For so long, I thought our love had to exist in secret corners, hidden away to survive. But that night, I saw clearly that it could exist in the light, that it deserved to. Our journey together was far from perfect, but that's what made it real. We kept growing, both as individuals and as a pair. There were challenges, work, responsibilities, the exhaustion of pushing against a world that wasn't always ready for us. But every time life tested us, we returned to the same truth: we chose each other. We chose to fight for love, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was messy. And in that choosing, day after day, we built something stronger than I ever imagined possible. Sometimes I think about the girl I used to be, the one who was terrified of her own reflection, who thought love like this could only end in ruin. I wish I could go back and tell her what I know now, that love is not the enemy, that hiding is a slow kind of death, and that the freedom of truth is worth every scar it leaves behind. I would tell her that the tears she cries will water the roots of a life she hasn't yet dared to dream of. And I would tell her that the girl she can't stop thinking about will become the woman who teaches her how to survive, how to live, and how to love with her whole heart. Now, when I wake up beside her, when the morning light spills across her face and her breath rises steady and soft, I feel a peace I never knew was possible. It's not the loud, dramatic kind of love they show in movies. It's quieter, deeper. It's the comfort of knowing that no matter what the world says, no matter who walks away, we have each other. And in the end, that's more powerful than anything that tried to tear us apart. I found something between her legs, yes, but it wasn't what the world would assume. It wasn't just physical. It wasn't just desire. What I found was love, pure and unapologetic. I found strength. I found a mirror that reflected the truest version of myself, one I had been too afraid to see alone. I found a future. What I discovered with her was not a secret to be hidden in the dark, but a truth worth carrying into the light. And now, I know this with certainty. Love doesn't always arrive the way you expect, and it doesn't always look like the world tells you it should. But when it's real, when it's raw, when it teaches you to live instead of just survive, you hold on to it with everything you have. Because love like that isn't just something you find, it's something that saves you.